Hello and welcome to Rapid Report, your trusted source for in-depth global news and analysis. Tonight, we bring you a major development from the Middle East that could reshape the balance of power and send shockwaves across the global economy. The Trump administration's recent military actions against Iran were meant to demonstrate strength, deter aggression, and collapse Iran's leadership. But as our reports show, the reality on the ground tells a very different story. Instead of weakening Tehran, these strikes have unified Iran, disrupted the Gulf region, and sent global oil prices soaring, posing direct consequences for ordinary Americans. In this report, we will break down the key events, explore the staggering economic and strategic fallout, and analyze what this means for the U.S., Iran, and the world. Stay with us as we unpack the consequences of a military strategy gone wrong, right here on Rapid Report. And before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with your friends and colleagues. Your support helps us bring you timely, accurate, and insightful news coverage every single day. Trump's Iran strategy backfires. Escalation, economic shock, and regional chaos. In a dramatic turn of events, recent military operations initiated by the Trump administration against Iran have yielded outcomes far from their intended goals. While Washington publicly claims victory, the unfolding reality tells a very different story, one marked by Iranian defiance, regional destabilization, economic turmoil, and the looming threat of prolonged conflict. The core contradiction: victory on paper, defeat on the ground. U.S. officials have been quick to declare success, presenting the recent strikes as a decisive blow to Iranian leadership. Press statements emphasize the destruction of key assets and suggest a successful strategy of coercion designed to force Tehran into compliance. Yet this narrative sharply contrasts with Iran's own messaging. Iran's leadership has not only survived but has emerged unified, issuing public statements that both reject U.S. claims of success and signal readiness for further escalation. The real story, analysts argue, lies in this stark gap between American official narratives and the on-the-ground realities in Tehran and across the Gulf. Trump's strategy and its unexpected failure. The Trump administration's approach rested on two assumptions. First, that targeted strikes would destabilize Iran's government. Second, that such destabilization would prevent retaliation. Intelligence estimates suggested that the removal or incapacitation of select military leaders could create a leadership vacuum, allowing the U.S. to negotiate from a position of strength. These assumptions have proven flawed. Iran's leadership remained intact, swiftly consolidating power and signaling that any U.S. miscalculation would be met with coordinated retaliation. Rather than collapse, the Iranian government demonstrated resilience and strategic unity, exposing a significant miscalculation in U.S. planning. Iran's first major announcement: a missed opportunity for de-escalation. Tehran initially offered a conditional opening for dialogue and potential de-escalation. Within hours of this gesture, the U.S. executed strikes that Iran claims effectively killed any chance for diplomacy. Iranian officials emphasized that the conflict has already cost the U.S. military an estimated $100 billion, a figure that underscores the financial stakes of continued confrontation. Moreover, Iran warned that these costs would soon be felt by ordinary Americans through rising gasoline prices, inflationary pressures, and broader economic instability. This early signal suggested that the conflict was entering a dangerous phase, with immediate repercussions for global markets and domestic U.S. households alike. Iran's second announcement: retaliation is inevitable. In a subsequent statement, Iran's National Security Council issued a stark warning: the United States will pay the price for its actions. Officials cited over 1,000 civilian deaths attributed to U.S. strikes, including a tragic incident in which a school strike reportedly claimed the lives of approximately 150 children. Tehran argued that these attacks have inadvertently unified the Iranian population behind their government, creating national solidarity that strengthens rather than weakens the regime. The message was clear. U.S. actions have not weakened Iran. They have emboldened it. The Strait of Hormuz, global oil supply at risk. One of the most immediate and alarming consequences of the conflict has been the virtual shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz, a strategic choke point through which approximately 20% of the world's oil supply transits. Iran's threats to restrict shipping have been taken seriously, prompting Kuwait and Qatar to halt or scale back oil production. Tehran has also warned that any U.S. naval attempts to escort oil tankers could result in catastrophic losses, with officials bluntly stating that such forces will end at the bottom of the Persian Sea. The closure of this vital maritime artery has sparked widespread concern in global markets, causing oil prices to surge and amplifying financial uncertainty worldwide. Regional destabilization expands. The consequences of the conflict have not been limited to the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian strikes have targeted major infrastructure in Dubai, Kuwait City, and other Gulf states, while the U.S. military has responded with limited naval engagements, including sinking an Iranian vessel near Sri Lanka. These developments have sent shockwaves through the Gulf, triggering panic among local governments and investors. Economic stability in the region is unraveling, and the risk of broader conflict involving multiple states appears increasingly probable. The U.S. messaging disconnect. While Iranian officials communicate the realities of a region under escalating stress, U.S. officials continue to issue statements emphasizing victory and ambitions to control Iran's oil. This messaging is sharply disconnected from the realities on the ground. The Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. U.S. forces have no territorial control within Iran. There has been no sign of Iranian surrender. Casualties and costs continue to rise. Experts argue that this disconnect risks further miscalculations, as public optimism in Washington may obscure the actual risks and economic costs of the campaign. Economic consequences for Americans. The human and financial toll is already apparent. Beyond military spending, analysts warn that rising oil prices will hit American households directly through higher gasoline and energy costs. Businesses dependent on global supply chains may face increased expenses, potentially slowing economic growth and adding to domestic uncertainty. The administration's narrative of swift victory obscures these mounting challenges, leaving ordinary Americans to shoulder the unintended costs of a poorly calculated military strategy. A strategy in crisis. The Trump administration's military actions toward Iran, intended as a demonstration of strength, have instead triggered defiance, destabilization, and economic disruption. Iran remains intact, united and resolute in its retaliation. The Gulf region teeters on the brink, global oil markets are unsettled, and the economic burden on U.S. citizens grows by the day. The conflict has highlighted a dangerous gap between Washington's messaging and reality on the ground, a gap that risks escalating further if unaddressed. Analysts warn that unless a reassessment occurs, the consequences will extend far beyond military calculations, affecting millions worldwide. In short, what was meant to be a quick strike and show of force has become a costly, destabilizing quagmire with unpredictable consequences. The world is watching closely as both sides prepare for the next chapter in a conflict that could reshape the geopolitics of the Gulf for years to come. Why the strategy failed and what comes next. Strategic miscalculations in U.S. policy. The Trump administration's approach to Iran relied heavily on what some analysts call a decapitation strategy, targeting key military and political leaders with the expectation of creating internal chaos. This strategy, however, underestimated the resilience and institutional cohesion of Iran's government. Iranian leadership unity. The strikes have inadvertently strengthened internal solidarity within Iran. Revolutionary Guard factions, political leaders, and public opinion appear increasingly aligned against external threats. Underestimation of nationalism. U.S. strategists seemingly assumed that civilian casualties and targeted strikes would erode support for the regime. Instead, the attacks have stoked nationalist sentiment, rallying citizens behind the leadership. Intelligence gaps. U.S. intelligence failed to fully account for the decentralized yet coordinated decision-making processes in Iran, leading to the misjudgment that removing select leaders would cause a vacuum. These miscalculations reflect a broader pattern of misreading adversary resilience in modern asymmetric conflicts. Military strength does not always translate into political leverage, especially in societies with deeply entrenched leadership structures. Regional implications. A Gulf on edge. The instability is no longer contained within Iran's borders. The entire Gulf region faces cascading effects. Economic contagion. With the Strait of Hormuz effectively closed, global oil supply chains are severely disrupted. Countries dependent on Gulf oil imports, including China, India, and the EU, face immediate supply challenges. Political volatility. Gulf monarchies like Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE face unprecedented pressure to balance security with economic continuity. Their vulnerability could embolden Iran to push for strategic concessions. Proxy escalation. Iran's network of regional allies, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shia militias in Iraq, and Houthi forces in Yemen, may now act more aggressively, potentially creating multiple fronts that stretch U.S. and allied forces thin. The combination of economic shock and political uncertainty increases the risk of missteps, making the Gulf a tinderbox for regional conflict, economic fallout, beyond the battlefield. The cost of the U.S.-Iran confrontation is not limited to military spending. Direct military costs, estimates of $100 billion spent so far, underscore the unsustainable financial burden on the U.S. defense apparatus. Continued operations could easily double this figure within months. Global oil prices. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz threatens roughly 1/5 of global oil flow. Prices have already spiked, and even a short-term disruption could result in sustained energy inflation worldwide. Domestic impact. Ordinary Americans will bear the brunt through higher gas prices, increased heating and electricity costs, and potential market volatility affecting pensions, mortgages, and retirement savings. In essence, the financial consequences may be more politically damaging than the immediate military outcomes. The credibility gap. Messaging versus reality. One of the most critical failures is the disconnect between U.S. public messaging and actual conditions on the ground. Seeming overconfidence. American officials continue to claim victory and speak of controlling Iran's oil resources. These statements, however, appear disconnected from reality. No territorial control has been gained, the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed, and Iran shows no signs of capitulation. Impact on international relations. Allies and adversaries alike are observing the credibility gap. European partners, already wary of U.S. unilateralism, may question Washington's judgment and ability to manage the crisis responsibly. Strategic risk. The perception of mismanagement or overconfidence increases the likelihood of miscalculations by both sides, raising the stakes for accidental escalation. This credibility gap may also embolden adversaries, who perceive U.S. messaging as a bluff rather than a reflection of power. Long-term geopolitical consequences. The current military escalation could reshape the Middle East strategically. Iran's regional influence. Rather than weakening Tehran, U.S. strikes may enhance Iran's image as a resilient power capable of deterring American aggression. Shifting alliances. Gulf states may reconsider their dependence on U.S. protection, potentially exploring closer ties with Russia or China for security guarantees. Global energy security. Prolonged instability in the Gulf could accelerate shifts toward alternative energy sources, including renewables and strategic reserves, reshaping global energy politics. Potential for prolonged conflict. Without a clear diplomatic path, the crisis risks becoming a protracted confrontation involving direct U.S.-Iran conflict, regional proxy wars, and global economic shocks. In short, what was intended as a swift, decisive demonstration of U.S. military power may instead be laying the groundwork for decades of instability in the region. Strategic recommendations for policymakers, analysts, suggest several steps to mitigate further damage. Reevaluate military objectives. Focus on achievable goals rather than symbolic strikes that escalate conflict without delivering political leverage. Engage in diplomacy. Explore back-channel talks with Iran to reopen conditional de-escalation pathways and prevent further civilian casualties. Strengthen Gulf security. Coordinate with allies to protect maritime trade routes and stabilize energy supplies. Transparent communication. Align public messaging with actual conditions to maintain credibility domestically and internationally. Failure to address these areas could lead to continued escalation, higher civilian and economic costs, and diminished U.S. influence in the region. This concludes our special report on the escalating U.S.-Iran tensions and their far-reaching impact. As we've seen tonight, what was meant to be a show of strength has triggered defiance, regional instability, and economic repercussions felt around the world. The situation remains fluid, and the coming days could bring new developments that will affect not just military strategy, but global energy markets and international relations. We'll continue to track every update and bring you detailed analysis as events unfold. If you found this report insightful, don't forget to subscribe to Rapid Report to stay informed. Like this video to support our coverage, and share it with your network so that others can understand the real story behind the headlines. Thank you for watching. And remember, here at Rapid Report, we go beyond the sound bites to deliver the truth behind the news.